Hey, Miguel, can you tell us about some of the new things that you're doing at IBL?
Yes, Michael. So pleasure to be talking with you as always.
Absolutely.
And and yes, so let me share my screen.
Sure.
So this is what we're doing, right? It's IBL.ai. It's an initiative designed to help implement generative AI for teaching and learning, right? Whether we're talking about administrators or instructors, tutors, you know any form of teaching and learning, right? And what we do is we empower learning platforms such as our skills or analytics or even our AI mentor builders with generative AI,
Mhm.
which includes language models, right? Whether it's from Google or Amazon or OpenAI or anything from the increasingly growing open source ecosystem, with instructor specified prompts and data sets, right? So how can you as an educator bring generative AI into a learning program and into a classroom? Because ultimately what we're trying to fulfill is a one-to-one teacher to student ratio,
Mhm.
because that's what you know generative AI, especially in education, is designed to bring about. So that is what we're doing, right? And there are many examples, right? So we're partners of Google and of Amazon, and we can walk through the specific examples of mentors and what the learning platforms look like. But this is effectively it.
Mhm. Fantastic. A lot of work in AI I see here. You're really embracing this at IBL.
I mean, there's really no other option, right? So on one hand, so there are on many levels, right? On one hand, let's say from big to small, right? So there are a lot of students who are not really served by the current system,
Mhm.
right? So online education specifically, right, works well for some segments of society. It doesn't really work well at all for others, right? And those others, right, those students who it doesn't work for are, well, completely left in the dark, right? And on top of that, you add a few more, you know, reskilling needs, which happen, of course, across the country and the world, and a few more elements on top of that, and you say, okay, so the current system, right, is not able to educate everybody, right? So instead of leaving, a bunch of students in the dark, we have a university that we're working with, for instance, who accepts 20% of the population that they accept come from lower income backgrounds, right? These are high schools with not a lot of AP courses per se.
Right.
Well, for those students, there's not really a great option coming into college because they don't have that STEM background or that math and reading background in many cases. So they have to spend 1 to 2 years just catching up, right? And that's a problem, right? Because it's expensive for them, it's expensive for the university, who also subsidizes this education. It's not great for the instructors, who are generally not thrilled about teaching those courses. So, from just a simple overview of the problem, we see that there are a lot of people who are not being served, right? And you could say, okay, well, let's just hire one human TA to serve each student, and say, okay, well, financially, obviously, that would make zero sense. So how can we fill in these gaps, right? And okay, so that's the problem statement. And you say, okay, well, AI, when we talk about, because AI obviously is or a big concept, big words, etc. For us, is very simple. It's, look, a one-to-one teacher to student ratio. Okay,
Mhm.
we want to radically improve the speed with which we produce courses, and we want to do this in a multi-language manner. I was actually going to show you here, Michael.
Sure.
Right, so here's a video.
Please share screen again.
Oh, yes, yes, yes.
Ah, looks great.
So awesome. So basically, here's a video
Hmm.
describing our course creator platform. Okay,
Okay.
which is fine. Now here's a video of me doing the same thing in China.
Wow.
Now, obviously, I don't speak Chinese. I took this in high school, but then when you go to college, you either, if you want to commit to study a language,
Mhm.
there was no room for a third major. So this is one area, right? It's just, okay, content production. Let's produce drastically faster,
Mhm.
and on top of that, let's have basically a platform, right, for instructors to be able to build these mentors. Maybe it's one per course, or ideally one per student, because the mentors can be aware of the state of the students, right? You can have access to the database. It's not really a problem, right? So when you look at these for teaching and learning, you say that, okay, well, now a lot of things that are maybe not feasible before, maybe they're feasible now, right?
Right.
Because now, your ability as an educator to create a lot more content and to dive much more personally into your students is actually more feasible. So this is what we're doing, right? And we can include this, right, in any learning system and so on. But that's what we're finding with AI, is that there's a very clear need, and we can talk about the downsides, right, or the perceived downsides rather.
Mhm.
But yes.
The upside to this video is about upsides and the upsides that you're doing. Um, so that second video that you made, that you transformed it into Chinese, we weren't able to hear, but that was so the voiceover was Chinese on that one, on this one.
Correct.
And how long
Correct.
does that take your system to take a English script and to convert it into Chinese, would you say? I mean, how accurate is it, would you say?
So, I mean, it depends on it. So it depends on a few things, right? So, like quality, whether it's audio or audio and video,
Yeah,
and there are a few variables. In this case, this was for a video that you can see, right, that is meant to be post produced and published. So if this takes an hour or so, then it's not really a problem.
right.
But if you're saying, okay, what's sort of the another use case, let's say from a tutoring standpoint, right? So we have, for instance, it's like, okay, well, we have a mentor, right? We have an application, which a mentor is really just a language model,
Mhm.
right? With your own data, with your own prompts and pedagogy. Okay. So let's just say you have a mentor and you want to speak with that mentor, right? You want to have a conversation. That is possible, right? And you can include that translation in it, right? But the way the conversation works is you will it's basically like it works here, right? So I am saying something, I'm
Mhm.
transmitting that audio to a server, right? That server is running it past the safeguards and the LLM, the
Mhm.
language model, in order to get an answer. And then that is being converted back from text to speech, and the speech is what's coming back into my browser. Okay,
Mhm.
so I have my speech, which I send to the server converts my speech to text, passes the text to the language model. Okay, so it gets another output, that's the answer. And then that speech, that response gets converted back to speech, and that speech comes back to my browser. And this happens, maybe it happens like for every word. So that's how you can have a normal conversation.
Great.
But that can happen, as we're going, right? And that's in English. And you're like, okay, well, how long for the translation? And it really depends on the volume. You can build sort of these applications so you're not translating 500 words at a time. You could be translating, 5 words, right, or a sentence at a time, right?
Mhm.
And because obviously you need some context, but that's it's meant to be very very natural, right?
Yeah.
And if you say, okay, well, right now, if we are having a conversation, every time that we ask for there to be a translation, we're at 1.2 seconds or so. So if you're talking to somebody, it's a little bit annoying, right? Because imagine we were talking and there has to be a latency of just a little bit more than a second. Frequently that would get annoying, but that is the gap that's being shortened. If you want to do it in English, no problem. If you want to translate, and you can afford to sort of wait an hour or so, right, for this post production, then that's how you get something like this. But
Fantastic.
yeah.
Phenomenal. Both things are phenomenal. The idea that you could create course content and within an hour have it in Chinese, but then you could do it over in Hindi and French, and before you know it, the videos are for world consumption, and this is very easily done with AI, and it can be done. And that idea of creating course content for all languages is very exciting and new, and makes like for a world of learners, all getting the same content in the same place is very exciting, as well as what we just saw using AI.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And you said Hindi, right? So if you want to use in Hindi, that's fine as well.
Right, right.
You can
I
see.
mean, tapping into millions of people by just converting the videos from one language to another. Now you could really have courses with people around the world, which is really probably what a lot of educators, IBL is really hoping for, that these people from around the world are getting the same sort of educational content. They're getting the same experience because you're making the videos for people with different languages. It's pretty exciting.
That's, and then there's another sort of dimension, right? So let's just say one way to think about it is, okay, so I have this static content or content that has been created, say by instructional designers and instructors, and I'm going to translate it. So that's okay. So horizontally you expand right into a bunch of other languages. Well, you can also expand, in terms of depth, right? So when you create a course and you say, okay, I'm going to ship a course, right, with a mentor, right? And a mentor, you're like, okay, well, what is that? So that's a chatbot, co-pilot, etc., that follows you throughout your learning experience. And that is trained on the materials that the course teaches and makes it possible for the user to inquire further about a topic.
Right.
Right. So it's like, if you're teaching me something, Michael, and I want to keep asking you questions and I want to go down rabbit holes, so let's say rabbit holes that are productive, well, I can. Right. That's something that is now feasible that beforehand it wasn't. Right. Beforehand, here's the content, you take it or leave it. Right. If you really want to study harder, I don't know, find a textbook or something. Now you're talking to effectively a text generation machine.
Yes.
Right. That you can orient. So when you want to really dive into a topic, you don't really have any barriers. Right. And just as you can go deeply, you could also say, okay, well, explain this to me in other terms. Like when I have, for instance, let's say I have 10 minutes to learn a topic, I'll do the explain things like I'm 5 version, right? Because I don't have time to go into a treatise on a topic, right? So you have that ability, right? So you have multiple languages. You can go in as deeply as you want or summarize and just dumb it down as you please. And third, you have something that obviously is logistically important, is something that can adjust to your schedule, right? So if you're, for example, working throughout the day and you need something at 3 a.m. just because that's maybe when you can do this, okay, well, that's a possibility. Now you don't have to wait for business hours on the next day or anything like that. So you look at all of these areas and you say, okay, well, that's why this generative AI is sort of such a killer in a good way, right? The system for education. It's because it really scales everything that we've been doing for years, right? And we've been producing courses also for a long time. We have our studios in Queens, and what we've seen, I mean, and this goes back for a while, right? But what we've seen is we can actually use AI to radically speed up the production of our content.
Right.
And we have, for instance, on edX.org, right, the ChatGPT series, there are 6 courses or so. Those were produced by our studios, and we use AI and so on. But in many ways, some of the process was traditional. Now we're going to another level where we have an agent that says, okay, let's listen for the important topics of the day. And let's say something like software engineering. Okay, so there's a new JavaScript framework or a new tool, a new API that comes out, and you want to create a course on that. It's like, okay, so I got the news story. I can get the documentation, the engineering documentation. I can put together those materials in some pedagogically appropriate way. Maybe I can even generate content with, from a video standpoint, like if you look at the videos that we sent you in other languages, the translations of my content in Chinese or in Hindi or whatever, there is, I did not say those things. Right. If you, my lips just move according to what is being said in Chinese, for example. So you can actually have the text to video. So you have courses basically created practically on the spot and on command, right? And those courses can be adapted. You're like, okay, so if I can do that, then there's no reason for me to have a unified set of courses for everybody. Instead, I'm going to say, okay, so Michael, what do you want to learn? Right? What do you know? Maybe I assess your understanding. Maybe I already have access to your file, whatever. And I'm going to create a course that specifically is for you. So
phenomenal, because the differentiated learning is what you're talking about, has always been very difficult to do in a classroom with one teacher and one textbook and students at different levels. It's always been a goal for people, educators, to have a differentiated learning path for every student, but it was always difficult to do. Now it's exploding. Like you could literally do that for every student, could have a sort of their own learning path through AI and generated AI. It's amazing how that goal or that dream to have differentiated learning in a classroom became easier to do. And it's fast.
I think that is, I think that's definitely the case. Because beforehand, you know, when you look at traditional adaptive learning solutions, right? And some app or some website, we were guilty of this in the past as well. Sure. We ask an instructional designer, say, hey, can you please create 80 multiple choice problems that are similar to this?
Right.
And they're like, no, right? Like no one has time to create 80 questions where before I would just create one. Right. So these traditional adaptive learning solutions, they never really go anywhere because it's just such a level of effort that is required from the creators where that cost, those economics don't even make any sense. So here you say, okay, well now, you know, that is unblocked, right? That barrier is down. Now we can go ahead. And I think, Michael, it's not really sort of a negative side, right? But it's something that when maybe as we're having this conversation, some people are like, okay, well, what does this mean for my job?
Sure.
Right? Because maybe it's a little bit, you know, it's a little bit daunting. And what we're seeing is that those content creators, right, and tutors who say, okay, well, we have not done our job fully. Let's say as an industry, not as individuals, right? But as an industry, we haven't done our job fully. There are many people who are not really being served by the current system. Well, by having freed myself of maybe a lower level task, right? Yes. Something that is maybe it just, you know, takes a little bit more time. For example, it's programming a website versus using a web builder, right? Sure. So, well, the web builder cuts down your time exponentially. You still need the websites, right? You probably even build way more websites now than you would have, you know, 20 years ago. Sure. But if you sort of automate away that sort of lower level work, and then you say, okay, so how can we, and this takes, you know, some requirements at the institutional level, but how can we move towards this next level of tasks? Then we see that, okay, nobody's job is going away. For instance, we're not firing any of our software engineers. In fact, we've hired more engineers because we just want to get through our roadmap faster. Even if each individual is 40% more productive for an engineer, that's a normal metric with this. Well, we're hiring more and more because we have a big roadmap to get through. From an educator standpoint, it's the same thing, right? It's what can you do? So we have had, for example, one educator, right, from engineering in a university in DC, who says, all right, if I have access to the analytics of what people are asking the mentors, I have a better understanding right now of what they have to learn and what they're even having questions about than I did before. And I can choose to orient my lessons the next day, right? Or now it's going to be more active learning and so on around those questions. So I have, even from an educator standpoint, a greater degree of insight than I did before.
Phenomenal. So I have 3 takeaways from our little interview here, this segment. One, the translating of video is phenomenal, exciting. The fact that you could start to create content across all languages, and that's getting better and faster, is just super exciting. Global classes, really, we're truly global classes, not just a global class where English is the main language. And no, globally, you could come in and learn in your language. That's super interesting. The chatting that you saw, the differentiated learning that might now explode, like differentiated learning in 1,000 ways. Like all the little granular data points could be used now to pinpoint or to guide someone through the best learning experience for them. Super exciting. And third, the fact that we as educators and instructional designers will still have a lot of work to do, new work. And that should be the goal, is that we are able to do more evolved things and different things and new things and more things as this happens, because that's really what we should be striving to do. So thank you for the ending with the thumbs, supportive. We're still going to be needed, and we'll be needed in new ways, but that's what makes life interesting and fun. Is we're going to have to pick up some new skills, but that's going to be to drive this forward. And I'm really excited about that.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's theory, and obviously, of course, we're very sympathetic to the fact that sometimes people have their very busy lives, a lot of things going on in their lives. It's not easy to just say, I'm going to learn a new skill. It's okay. Well, maybe yes, or maybe there are other circumstances that make that a lot more difficult, right? So, on one hand, I think as an industry, you sort of weigh that versus, okay, who are all these students right now who are completely underserved or not served at all, right? So I think there is a point where it would make more sense for people to sort of, let's say, fear the job loss, right situation. And it would be when everybody is being educated to the extent that is pleasing to everybody else, right? So if you could say everybody in my city, in my country, let's say the world, right, is being educated, has access to that education that they should in order to be able to have opportunity, well, then at that point, any increased efficiency from AI means that all that human labor is surplus, right? It's not really necessary.
Sure.
Now, we're nowhere near that point,
right?
You look at who can be educated right now, and you say, well, you have to have a lot of things line up in your favor from a privilege standpoint in order to even have access to that. So until we're at that point, right, until we don't have, for example, this university telling us that 20% of their students are very unlikely to study math or anything engineering wise because they don't come from that background, you effectively, can map that script to being something like, I'm too poor. My background is too poor for me to study anything engineering wise. Say, well, you frame it in those terms, because those are the current terms. You see that, oh, well, we actually have a big problem right now. And this is a massive vector for solutions. So I don't think there is, any concern here, let's say from a societal standpoint about teaching and learning, or, educators, tutors, etc., losing any sort of job because this problem is not solved. Now, does the job change a little bit more? Well, maybe that, yes, right? But if we're still sort of, rowing in the same direction, well, then that's different. And there is one other area, Michael, where I think it would be helpful to talk about that.
Sure.
And this was, I think we had talked about this briefly, the whole Khan Academy example.
Yes.
So there was let me see if I can screen share for a second. So there was so there's a development, right, from Khan Academy, right? It's been out for a few months. It's interesting, right? They released their bot called Amigot, right, which you can see here, and it's been advertised heavily. I mean, it's Salman Khan, right, genius in education, very good, right, and it's been deployed, right, and it's being deployed across a number of school systems across the country, right, and the idea is that it's a tutor, right, that follows the students along, right? Some predetermined learning paths from the instructors. Okay, so this was kind of interesting, right? It was, this was not too long ago, right? In the New York Times, there was I don't know if it's not really a hit piece, right? But they were talking about how this bot, right, had been deployed. It's basically this mentor, right, is deployed in their system, and then the instructors at Newark public schools would complain that this is either moving, too quickly or too slowly. For them, it's a black box, right? And it's like, well, of course, it's an LLM, right? So you can't really say, well, why do you think that? I mean, it's an LLM, it's trained on billions of parameters. To some extent, it's a black box for everybody, regardless, even the people who build the model. But the instructors were complaining that it's more black boxy than they would like it to be.
Sure.
Right. So they're putting it in front of the students in the classroom, and they're saying, well, we don't really have that much control. Now, when you build a model, you have there are a few elements, right? A few elements that sort of make a model work. And it's, on one hand, you're choosing the data, and you say, okay, so this mentor is going to be oriented around this data, and then I'm going to choose the prompts, right? So the prompts are respond, for example, in a kind manner, right? If the student asks about something else, don't answer, right? That's sort of what goes on at the prompt level. These instructors, Newark public schools, were complaining that they don't have control over the prompts.
Right.
And it's like, well, fair enough, right? So whenever they would have any sort of complaint or any sort of request, they would go to Khan Academy, they would go to those engineers, and they would say, okay, well, we'll get back to you in a couple of days, right? Reasonable timeline, yes, right, for a system that's built like this, but nevertheless, for the instructors, not a lot of visibility. So what we're trying to do is saying, okay, well, we need that visibility, right? And instructors need to be building their own mentors, right? They need to have control over the prompts, okay? Because what they're doing is, especially when they're putting this in front of their students, say, well, they need to have a higher level of control than just, let's plug into a black box that's going to read whatever text to the students in my class. So you need more control. So that's sort of what we're doing, right? So when we say, okay, well, we're doing this mentor builder, for instance, right? What we're talking about is a system that says, okay, from an instructor standpoint, you're going to name your mentors, right? Mm-hmm. And you choose your data, your interface, your conversations, etc. And that way, you're going to have a lot more control. Wow. Than you would with something that's more black boxy. So that gives even content creators, instructors, etc., a much greater degree of agency and ability, because otherwise, the implicit assumption that we're making is that, I don't know, we know how to teach history to a 10th grader better than an instructor who's been doing that for a decade. And we don't, right? We're engineers. So this is saying, okay, so we're engineers, and precisely because we're engineers, we're going to be building the tools for you to be able to educate and modify these mentors, right, for your own classroom. And if you open that up, well, it's not as much of a black box anymore for these instructors, which means that there is buy-in, maybe, whereas before there wasn't, right? Because before it was a little bit of a black box. You're kind of, delegating all sort of control and agency and understanding, right, over to some AI system. But now you are able to steer it, right? And you're able to build, your own guardrails and your own, safeguards and paths and so on.
I mean, that's phenomenal. Let me understand if I understand this correctly. So Khan Academy builds this really great, big sort of AI tutor, but because it has to, be used by millions of people and millions of teachers, it's kind of black boxy. And they had to. That's an affordance they needed to get it out to the world. IBL is sort of taking that idea and it's making it a little bit more open door, where teachers have a little bit of the ability to create the box that they want, or to create the tutors that they want. Is that correct?
That's exactly it, right?
That's awesome.
Yeah, thank you, Michael. Yeah. So there are a few reasons for that, right? Like on one hand, Khan Academy, right, serves a specific audience, right? A specific audience, and it has a traditional model, right? It's a nonprofit, right? There are many things.
Of course.
On another,
Right.
we are, what we're doing is we build these tools, right, for teaching and learning, but we have on one hand clients that are Fortune 50 companies,
Right.
right? The NVIDIAs, Googles, Amazons, etc. On the others, these are research universities,
Sure.
or many universities. On the others, governments. There is no, when you look at something as powerful as this AI, there's something that people always ask. It's like, okay, so how do you? And it's a very relevant debate, right? But how do you sort of ensure sort of the safety, right, of these systems to not say things that you don't want it to say, for example, right, or to go off the rails, right? So it's a very relevant question. Now, what we like to do is we say, okay, we like to just say, well, the people who are building on this, right, these educators who need to understand how these systems work, because this is where everything goes, have a greater degree of control over the prompts and of the data sets and so on themselves. We don't need to mandate something as a company, as an AI company, basically encoding our philosophy right into these mentors. Not really. Instead, we say, here are the building blocks, here are the tools. We're going to make it so it's easy for you to build yourself, right, and to steer yourself. But you're going to have that control. So that's
it makes perfect sense. I mean, to me, it makes perfect sense. Not only does it make perfect sense that a company like IBL would do that, it's almost what you should be doing as a company large enough and having the ability to actually create innovative or streamline or boutique type of things. It makes sense that you would take a wonderful idea like that and then kind of retailer it for specific teachers, because you're not burdened by all of the restraints that Khan is. So you're just doing something, you're taking a product and making it, work for your clients, which I think is what you should be doing. I think that's a wonderful, innovative strategy that IBL has. And you could do things that Khan simply can't. Khan still has a fantastic tool, but they're up against a lot of restraints that you're not. So why should you have to live by those? I think it's fantastic. I think it's what you should be doing, right?
Awesome. No, I mean, yeah. And you can, go into there other things, for instance, right? So when you're building your mentors, right? So let me show you what we're talking about, right? Because there are a lot of options, right? And there's a lot of things that you could do, right? Because you could have chatbots, you could have agents, right? You could have a lot of things. Well, for instance, at the language model layer, like, you don't have to use ChatGPT or OpenAI, right? Maybe that's fine. Maybe it's not fine, right? We know, for example, there are some governments that have, some state governments that have told their universities, you can't use that, right? Because you're literally sending your student data somewhere else. So, okay, if that's important. So you have to be able to choose your language model, right? And you have, you have OpenAIs, but you also have Googles, you have Amazons, you have many open source ones. Obviously, there was that famous article from it's kind of a leaked memo, they said, right, from a senior person at Google that said that they have no moat, and neither does OpenAI, because their biggest competitor is open source, because open source is just moving insanely quickly, right? And then there are other companies like Meta, right, that are just diving entirely into open source. So they have models like Llama 2, which are great. You really don't have to send your data anywhere else. You don't have to sign any sort of privacy agreements with, let's say, OpenAI or anything. Well, those attributes are selectable, right, and chosen, right, by an instructor who's maybe building a mentor. So let's just say you, Michael, want to build, MichaelSanamo.ai. Okay, during COVID, you got all your lectures from Zoom recorded, so you have a massive data set of what you say and what you teach about, even in your style, right? And you want to build a mentor that is your AI counterpart, accessible over, I don't know, let's say Slack or WhatsApp or an API or whatever. You may say, okay, well, for whatever reason, it could be financial, it could be privacy, it could be performance, anything. You want to choose this language model. You want to have these prompts. You want to have your content be augmented by data from this source. So if I'm teaching a course about Python, right, maybe the Python documentation is an interesting source to augment my lectures with. Okay, so that degree of composability, right, is something that, okay, can get really, if you really want to modify things, right, you can go in pretty deep into that modification, right? And that is what, we believe should be in the hands of the educators, right, that build on, for example, on our system, right? It's, you need to have that control, because you're going to do a better job teaching to your students and coding system prompts that are better tailored for your audience than we would, as some, or some company that has just mandates what your pedagogy should be. It's like, no, you are better at that than we are.
Oh, I want wonderful. I love it.
Awesome. Thank you, Michael.
Yeah, that's great. I can't wait to, is your presentation done? That was fantastic. It really got me thinking. Yeah. It got me excited. Awesome. I can't wait to share this with people, post it, let people know who IBL is, what they're doing in video creation, differentiated learning, AI. So, hey, Miguel, thank you for the presentation. Thank you for the time.
And anything like, yeah, I mean, and if we can do something together, yeah, right, whether it's at Columbia or something else, right, let's say with the plus thing or with anything else, obviously, we're both okay. So today I'm calling, and I guess today there's a lot of flooding in New York, so maybe today would not be a great day, but any other day, literally, we're 35 minutes away.
All right, we'll talk. Thank you, Miguel.
Awesome. You're awesome. Okay, see you.